Okay, I had gotten a request to do some historical pieces, and I'm going to start out with the Declaration of Independence. We're going to kind of go over what led up to America declaring independence, why they declared independence, because the war actually was going on before they wrote the Declaration of Independence, so why they felt it necessary to write it, and so on and so forth. To start out with, the roots of the American Revolution were really in about 1760s. This was when the British started enacting various taxes um, to try and raise revenue from the colonies. The reason they wanted to raise revenue from the colonies was that during the French and Indian War, the British had spent a lot of money on the colonies, and they felt that the colonies should pay some of that money back because they had gone into debt helping out the colonies. The colonists did not see it that way. The colonies felt as though this was an erosion of their liberty. It may be hard to envision that today because, from today's perspective, we would think, well, they didn't really have any liberties. They were still under the rule of, the King of England. They were under Britain's rule. They didn't really have any liberty, but that's not necessarily accurate. Since about the 1600s, when the British had really started colonizing America, the British had allowed a degree of self governance for the colonies. Looking back on it, it was probably a bad idea for them to allow the level of self governance that they allowed, but the reason that they allowed it was that it made it very easy to maintain this fairly sizable amount of territory overseas because they didn't have to necessarily be involved in all the everyday affairs of what was going on there. They allowed them to have their own legislatures and make their own laws and carry out their own justice. That meant that the crown didn't have to worry about justice in the colonies, it was being taken care of. That's why they did it. So, by the time of the 1760s, people had become very accustomed to governing themselves. They felt that they could do it very well and that they had a good system in place of their own laws. They did not like the idea that the British were coming in and trying to enforce laws that they didn't pass. What really stirred up the populace for the revolution was the Sons of Liberty. Now, you listen to a name like that and you would say to yourself, those sound like patriotic people. That sounds like probably a very good group. Honestly, in a lot of ways, the Sons of Liberty would be roughly comparable today to some type of militant group. Um, you might even consider them almost a terrorist group. They're not quite like our terrorist groups today, not nearly that violent, but they were violent. They did have people killed. Um, these Sons of Liberty really had support from quite a few printing presses, and they would put out papers and just fill them with propaganda, stir up the populace against the British, and they're really one of the major causes of the revolution were the Sons of Liberty. So by 1775, the situation had become very bad. I mean, it was very obvious that at least some of the territories were descending into anarchy. And so the British, they decided that they were going to send out a group to capture the munitions from from Lexington and Concord. I believe Concord was the eventual target. Lexington was more or less just in the way, but they sent out this group, and this was really a mistake on the part of the British, to be honest. Um, if they hadn't sent out that group, I can't say that the revolution wouldn't have happened, but they could easily have staved it off for several more years. But when they sent out that group to capture the colonists' weapons, that really forced the hand of the colonists because they wanted to defend their weapons. And Lexington and Concord are the first two battles of the Revolution. By 1776, there were two main causes that I would really point to for why the colonies decided to write a Declaration of Independence. Before this, it was just a fight between them and the British. They were already fighting them, but it was a fight between them and the British to get the British to acknowledge that they had at least some right to self-governance. The reason that they declared independence is heavily involved with the fact that the American army, which was at this point in time was not really much of an army yet, but the American army had forced the British to retreat. They had surrounded them in Boston and forced them to surrender the city and flee. And that really gave a lot of confidence to Continental Congress. In addition, this was about the time that Common Sense came out. It was written by Thomas Paine, and it really conjured up a view of a very democratic society. And it was something that people wanted to fight for. It was something they wanted to obtain. And these two things combined really are what pushed them to declare independence. Now, in the Declaration of Independence, you can read some of it right here. You can also go and Google it if you want. You can also Google the original draft that was written by Thomas Jefferson. His original draft really was scathing towards slavery. He blamed it on the British, but I don't really feel that's a fair assessment. There are obviously plenty of colonists who liked slavery, who wanted to have slaves, um, but that got ripped apart by Continental Congress. The reason it got ripped apart was honestly, the southern states probably would not have joined in the revolution if it meant losing their slaves. So they kind of kicked the can down the road on that. They sort of said to themselves, well, we know some people don't like it. We know some people are fine with it. There's a debate about it, but we'll worry about that later on. Right now, we just want to win our independence. And they kicked the can down the road, and they eventually, that's what became the Civil War. So, told you a little bit about where the Declaration of Independence came from, what it originally said, how it got changed, what sort of pushed the American Revolution. If you have any questions or comments, just write them down and post them, and I'll take a look at them. I'm intending on doing a series after this about the Constitution. But if there's any other parts of history that y'all want to hear about or you'd like to see about, you can go as far back as the Greeks or even further, or modern history with the Soviet Union. I'd be willing to do videos if you present an interesting topic. Like with all my videos, respectful comments, no hatred. I'm not for that. Peace out.